the other day in Psalm 2, when we were looking at it one Wednesday evening. Why do the nations rage, and the peoples plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. It's a description of a world in revolt, a world that resents the law of God, a world that does not want to be bound by the commandments of God, a world that wants to be free from what it regards as the shackles of God's commands. Romans 1 likewise gives a terrible picture of a world in revolt. Romans 1 makes clear that sin involves gross ingratitude towards God. Verse 21, although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Romans 1 makes it clear that this sinful rebellion involves foolishness. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. Romans 1 makes clear that this rebelliousness provokes God's judgment. Verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And we must be clear that the Bible teaches us that we live among rebels. We live in a rebellious world. 1 John 5, the whole world lies in wickedness, or under the power of the evil one. And that is the whole reason and purpose why Jesus Christ came into the world. He came that he might deliver us from this present evil world. And so we have God's complaint against the rebelliousness of man. The third thing we learn is the corruption that is involved in rebelling against God. Verse 4, alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. A nation, he says, weighed down with iniquity. That word iniquity, it primarily means crookedness, twistedness, perverseness. And he sees a nation weighed down by corruption. Evildoers and children who are corrupters. Paul speaks about those who know the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, yet they not only do the same, but they also give approval to those who practice them. Not content simply with doing them themselves, they approve and encourage and corrupt others. They have forsaken the Lord. Is it really possible that God saw the nation of Israel in such a light? Well, the prophet tells us that he did. And when we turn to the New Testament, we see how the Apostle Paul speaks of the world at large in very similar terms. Romans chapter 3 verse 10, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands, there is none who seeks after God. They have all turned aside, they have become unprofitable. There is none who does good, no, not one. And so on, throughout that whole terrible picture of the human race in rebellion against God. And we have to understand and realize that this is an intrinsic and inescapable part of the Christian message. Nobody wants to talk about these things, and yet they are necessary. And unless we face the reality of our sinfulness, we will always look to foolish and inadequate solutions. If a man does not realize that his body is being eaten with cancer, he will not go to a cancer specialist. He will buy indigestion tablets, or he'll turn to some other completely ineffectual remedies. It's only when he faces the reality of what is actually wrong with his body that then he's in a position to go to where it may be cured. And it's only as we see the extent of our human corruption and sin that we shall see why God sent his Son into the world. Why did Jesus come? Did he come because man had some little minor problems that he needed dealt with? Did Jesus suffer in Gethsemane? Did he go to the cross of Calvary just to tamper with some little minor adjustment that needed to be done to our human nature? He came because of the corruption of man, his helplessness in sin. And we must not soft pedal the reality of this truth. It is not what people want to hear. Well, it's not what I want to preach on either, but that has got nothing to do with it. What I preach on is not to be determined by what I like to preach on. And what people hear is not to be determined by what they want to hear. Someone may say, if we talk too much about these things, people will turn away, they'll find another church. So they will, very probably. But they will not find another way of salvation. And it is only as we face the awful reality of human sin that we are driven to Jesus Christ, God's remedy for our fallen condition. It's only as we see our problem that we see that Christ and Christ alone can save. We also see the foolishness of sin. Verse 5, the prophet challenges these people in their condition. He asks the question, why? Why should you be stricken again? Why will you revolt more and more? Why are you bringing such trouble upon yourselves? And he draws attention to the consequences of their behaviour. Verses 5 and 6 are a metaphor. He's picturing Israel as a human being who is desperately sick. The whole head is sick, the heart faints, from the sole of the foot even to the head there is no soundness, only wounds, bruises, sores that have not been treated. And then in verses 7 and 8 he gives the actual picture, the reality of which he's speaking. Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, strangers devour your land in your presence. It is a land which has been suffering from the ravages of war, invasion, and it has come desperately close to being totally overrun and wiped off the map altogether. And here Jerusalem is left standing. Yes, but he says it's rather like a hut in a garden. It's like a little booth in a vineyard. Just this solitary city, desperately vulnerable. And we see God is saying to these people, why will you continue when it brings this kind of judgment upon yourselves?